Welcome back to Monitors Unboxed. It's time to update our 1440p monitor recommendation guide for 2025 so far. I've tested a bunch of new products since our last update. There's of course been price changes for some of my existing favorites, and I continue to believe the monitor market is in a healthy position right now. What isn't so healthy at the moment is the general economic climate, especially in the United States, where tariffs continue to be a mess for consumer electronics like monitors. In these sorts of buying guides, there's usually a heavy focus on the price of monitors. After all, what ultimately matters is value. But that's difficult to discuss right now when tariffs are making things unpredictable. We just don't know whether the prices we're talking about today will also be the case in a month or 2 months from now, especially as existing inventory is replaced by fresh shipments that are then subject to tariffs. With that in mind, I'm going to try to do my best to navigate this situation and still make this guide useful for people in North America and other regions around the world. As usual, there will be many monitors recommended in this video, so hopefully when it comes time to hit the buy button, at least one of those options will be appealing. We have links in the description below to check current pricing and, of course, purchase these displays. As with our previous best of videos, we tend to talk about and recommend monitors we've personally tested and know to be good, or monitors that are very similar to products we have tested. It's always worth going back and checking out the dedicated monitor reviews we produce for more in-depth thoughts on each product. But just so you know, these recommendations are not sponsored in any way by any company. They're based on our testing and reviews. So let's get into it. In my previous 1440p monitor guide, I recommended the AOC Q27G3XMN as the best 1440p mid-refresh rate gaming monitor, and that continues to be the case into 2025. If you want a display that's affordable, packs a good resolution and refresh rate, plus delivers great image quality for both SDR and HDR gaming, the Q27G3XMN is still a great choice, especially if you mostly play single-player titles. The Q27G3XMN has a terrible name, but what it does pack is a 27-inch 1440p 180Hz VA LCD panel with a decent 336 zone full array local dimming backlight, providing true, though entry-level HDR hardware capabilities. And you'll get all of that for around $270 US or a little over €300, which is an astonishingly low price point. Competition is increasing for lower cost true HDR LCDs, but I'm yet to test something as competitive or well performing as this. With 336 zones, you get much tighter dimming in HDR scenes than edge-lit dimmed monitors, leading to a better contrast ratio in real-world content, richer blacks and shadows, and a high peak brightness that exceeds 1000 nits. Of course, we're not seeing a flagship high-end experience from 336 zones. There can be issues with blooming and so on, but it destroys most LCD competition at a similar price. If you want to do HDR gaming on a 1440p monitor, proper local dimming is a must, and that's why I highly recommend the Q27G3XMN. Most other low-cost HDR monitors I've tested have had heaps of issues, like shockingly bad firmware that doesn't allow you to easily switch between the SDR and HDR modes, or busted calibration that makes the monitor near unusable. None of these things are an issue on the AOC model, although there can be minor issues with scan lines and backlight zone flicker. This isn't just an HDR monitor though. With the 1440p 180Hz panel, you're getting a great resolution and refresh rate for today's games. Motion performance is okay from a VA LCD, delivering the best tuning I've seen from a non-Samsung implementation. Dark level smearing isn't fully eliminated, but it's not too problematic, and response time speeds overall are fine. It's not a fast monitor by any stretch, but it does a good enough job that it's not a deal breaker for those that want an affordable, true HDR monitor, perfect for story-driven games in particular. If you're buying a 1440p monitor for multiplayer gaming or fast-paced games, this is where the Q27G3XMN isn't as strong of a choice because you're less likely to benefit from HDR. A lot of today's popular competitive games either don't support HDR or are best played without HDR. In that case, you'll want a faster monitor with better response time tuning instead. I'd recommend either saving money and going for the budget 1440p mid-refresh rate choices that emit proper HDR, or jumping up to a budget 1440p high refresh monitor that will deliver smoother motion and lower input lag. Those options are featured later in this video. For everyone else though, the AOC Q27G3XMN is the best 1440p mid-refresh rate monitor and one of the best choices on the market below $300 US. Availability is improving as well. Last time I recommended this display, it was not available in Australia at all. Today you can purchase it for around 520 Aussie dollars, which isn't the best price compared to other regions, but it can still be a solid choice depending on what you're after. Also, it's worth noting that an alternate version of this display will be launching shortly, the AOC Q27G40 XMN, which bumps the backlight up to 1152 zones. I expect this will be a little more expensive than the G3 version and coexist with it in the market, and of course we don't know how it will perform just yet, but it's one to keep an eye on. The price for budget 1440p monitors continues to fall, which is one of the many positive stories about the monitor market right now. You're not going to find any HDR options in this sort of range, but if you're happy with SDR gaming and want the best bang for buck, this is where you'll find it. In particular, this is a great category for those that primarily play multiplayer games. Right now, the golden zone for budget 1440p monitors is between $180 and $230 US. This is where a lot of the decent options can be found. Anything cheaper tends to sacrifice a bit too much, anything above this price, and it's encroaching on true HDR monitors and high refresh rate models. Lots of 1440p monitors are being sold at too high of a price, so be on the lookout for bad deals. A general rule of thumb for this category is you should be looking for around a 60% discount in your region compared to the cheapest OLED. So if you can find a 1440p OLED for $600, I would spend no more than $240 on one of these monitors. In Australia, the cheapest OLEDs are about 850 AUD, so the target price for budget 1440p is around $340 Aussie. Here are some of the options that I think are great buys. If you can find the MSI G274QPF-QD inside the golden price zone, it's a great buy with the lowest price I've seen around $230 these days. The MSI model is a 27-inch 1440p 170Hz IPS LCD. It's well balanced. It's the product you'd get if you want the widest color gamut, as it's enhanced with a quantum dot layer. Response time tuning isn't as strong as some of the other options, but it generally looks great and it comes in at a value price point. LG continues to offer solid deals for budget buyers, and pricing really fluctuates a lot, both between regions and on a week-to-week basis. Right now in the US, for example, you can grab the 27GL83A for just $190, which is a great buy for a now aging panel. It still holds up in the sub $200 market. In Australia, the 27GP850 is one of the most affordable models, and it too holds up, offering strong response times and great sRGB mode calibration, though the contrast ratio is not very good. There are other variants to keep an eye on that are quite similar to these models, like the 27GL850 and 27GP83B. These are all classic 27-inch 1440p 144 to 180Hz IPS LCDs. The Asus ROG Strix XG27 ACS is another great monitor, offering a 1440p 180Hz IPS LCD with variable overdrive, so it's one of the best tuned variants for motion performance, and it has great color quality. But its regular price is a little high in my opinion, usually sitting around $260 US. I've seen it on sale for $200 at times, and that's when I'd pull the trigger for sure. That's a great price, and this is probably one of the best monitors in this category. Similar in Australia, at $440 this is a no, but at $370, which is its current price, I think it's very appealing. The ASRock PG27QFT2A is another monitor to look out for, as it's often one of the cheaper models on offer. This is the most basic of the 1440p gaming monitors, omitting features like an sRGB mode and KVM switch that's often found on more premium models. It has decent brightness, good viewing angles, and a great contrast ratio for a 180Hz IPS LCD, but slower response time tuning than other models I've recommended. Get this if you want something basic and functional for gaming, but don't care too much about the best accuracy or performance. The main consideration with the ASRock model is that it's not as good as the others I've mentioned so far, so it has to be cheaper for it to be worth buying. I've seen it around the $170 to $180 US mark in the past, which is very appealing, but with tariffs that may no longer be possible. It's $210 right now. The MSI model I mentioned earlier is just 10% more, so that's what I'd get. But if it's in the range of 20% cheaper, now we're looking at a great buy. There's a range of other lower cost LCDs that I'm planning to test throughout 2025, so check back later in the year for more recommendations on that front. I'm hesitant to recommend anything in this category without testing it because there are some real stinkers from time to time, even ones that use the same panel as products I've tested. So hopefully I've provided enough options for the time being. If you're looking for a great high refresh rate 1440p gaming monitor, and just an excellent gaming monitor in general, look no further than today's 27-inch OLED monitors. Available in multiple flavors, OLED typically offers the best performance in this category, and with prices continuing to fall, there's no better time to jump into the OLED ecosystem than now. There's a couple of ways you can go here, and it really depends on what is available in your region and at what price. The Asus ROG Strix XG27 AQDMG that I recommended 6 months ago is still a great WOLED option, but the QD-OLED competition is fierce and cheaper than ever, plus most of the QD-OLEDs I've tested have performed really well, so I'm going to go through a number of choices here. My favourite pick of the bunch remains the Asus XG27 AQDMG, a glossy WOLED monitor offering a 27-inch panel size, 1440p resolution, and 240Hz refresh rate with adaptive sync. As an OLED, it features individual pixel control and elite response times, making it particularly well suited to HDR gaming. Its transition speed at 240Hz results in motion clarity that's roughly equivalent to 360Hz LCDs, and these benefits are seen even at lower refresh rates as well, making it highly versatile for all sorts of gaming, whether we're talking single player or multiplayer. The HDR performance on offer here is very good, leading to excellent image quality, particularly for single-player experiences. We get deep zero-level blacks and tight control over highlights, which produces clean HDR imagery free of zone artifacts, and this is true of all OLEDs. This particular WOLED has decent brightness too for both high and low APL content, plus no panel dimming in bright scenes, in addition to a glossy coating that preserves good black levels and is free from coating grain. I would recommend this monitor to most buyers, but only if the pricing makes sense in your region and is in the ballpark of QD-OLED products. In the US right now, it's priced a little under $700. The cheapest QD-OLEDs are in the $600 to $680 range. That's reasonable to me for a monitor that on the bounce of things is probably slightly better than the QD-OLEDs. But in Australia, the XG27 AQDMG is $1,500, whereas you can get QD-OLEDs for below $1,000, which is far too large of a price gap and effectively rules this monitor out from contention. With the QD-OLED variants, there are two main refresh rate options, 240Hz and 360Hz, which both use essentially the same panel and largely deliver the same panel characteristics. Relative to the XG27 AQDMG I was just talking about, these QD-OLEDs have some strengths and weaknesses. The 360Hz models have better motion clarity due to a higher refresh rate, but only when used above 240Hz. When gaming at lower refresh rates, particularly for single-player games as an example, the extra refresh rate on offer is not much use, so I'd only consider the 360Hz refresh rate an advantage if you were going to use it, or if those variants were simply the cheapest in your region. QD-OLED also has a greater color volume, better text clarity at this size and resolution, plus higher peak brightness in some scenes. The glossy coating is also better at handling mirror reflections. The weaknesses are panel dimming in brighter scenes, which is not an issue on WOLED monitors, meaning in some real-world HDR content, the XG27 AQDMG will be brighter. And another weakness is how the QD-OLED panel handles ambient light, raising blacks when lighting isn't optimal. It's not clear-cut which of the QD-OLED or WOLED panels is better, and my preference for glossy WOLED is only a mild preference. There's plenty of reasons to get a QD-OLED, and the good news is that all the variants I've tested are great, so it's really hard to go wrong. These include the MSI MPG271QRX, the Dell Alienware AW2725DF, the Gigabyte FO27Q3, and the Asus ROG Strix XG27 ACDNG. The essentials to performance are identical between these models as they all use the same 360Hz panel, and often there will be a 240Hz variant available that's a little cheaper, with the only difference being that refresh rate. For example, there's the MSI 271QPX-E2, which is a bit cheaper than the 271QRX, and Gigabyte offer the FO27Q2 as a variant of the FO27Q3. Of those I've tested, the Asus and Gigabyte models both include a boosted brightness HDR configuration, but I wouldn't necessarily base my purchasing decision around it. The Asus model has black frame insertion, but that's a niche feature most people won't use. The MSI model allows you to fine-tune OLED care features to the largest extent of any OEM. The Dell model is the best calibrated version, but along with the Gigabyte model lacks decent USB-C power delivery. It really comes down to specific features you might want to use, so check the reviews for more information in addition to the price. If there's no specific feature that jumps out and you're stuck on which one to buy, I would just get the cheapest. The Alienware AW2725DF is a really great option in the US right now at $650 US. It's basically the same price as 240Hz QD OLEDs, yet offers a higher 360Hz refresh rate. But its regular price of $900 is much less attractive, so wait for those sales. I'd also be on the lookout for the MSI 240Hz variants, though unfortunately the price has gone up from $600 to more like $650 over the last few months. In Australia, the 240Hz QD OLEDs tend to be especially attractive, often sitting in the $800 to $900 range, which I think makes them the obvious choice at the moment, and I'll be testing some of the latest versions of these shortly. These models are also highly attractive in Europe, with multiple options like the Gigabyte MO27Q2 sitting down below €600. Don't rule out the AW2725DF though, which can also be a great price in Europe if you want to spend a bit more on 360Hz. And finally, there are some variants I haven't tested of course, but given how close all the QD OLEDs perform, if you do want to risk an untried model, it's probably safe to do so. With that said, I would generally only recommend OLED for content consumption, such as gaming or watching videos. There is a risk of permanent burn-in with OLEDs exacerbated by static content, like you would see when using productivity apps and web browsers. For mixed use cases or situations where you primarily use your display for work, it's difficult to recommend an OLED right now. I would also steer clear of first generation 240Hz W OLEDs at this point, the ones using the matte panels, as usually brightness is worse than what you get on the XG27AQ-DMG, and pricing is no longer competitive with QD OLEDs, typically falling in the same ballpark for a worse display, at least in my opinion. Now you might want a 1440p high refresh rate monitor, but for whatever reason, you don't want an OLED. Maybe they're too expensive in your region, maybe you don't want to deal with the burn-in risk, or maybe you simply won't benefit from what OLED brings to the table. In this case, there are still some good LCD options on the market today, so long as you aren't paying a huge premium for it. My general rule of thumb here is that you should be aiming for a 30 to 40% discount to downgrade from an OLED to an LCD at 1440p 240Hz. This is because the motion clarity of an LCD at the same refresh rate is worse than an OLED, and typically you'll also lose out on true HDR functionality. Monitors with reduced performance or features should naturally be cheaper, even if they are still solid products at the end of the day, so don't be tempted to overspend here. So with my rule in play, let's say the cheapest 240Hz OLEDs in your region are $600, then the price you should be aiming to get a 1440p 240Hz LCD for is around $360 or lower. And there's good news here because there are some decent options that fit this criteria, in particular the LG 27GR83Q, Gigabyte M27QX, and MSI G274QPX. All three are 27-inch 1440p 240Hz IPS LCDs with similar performance. The LG model is usually the best of the trio, with slightly better response time tuning, somewhat better color accuracy, and a wider range of calibration options. The MSI and Gigabyte models trade blows, with the Gigabyte producing slightly better motion and the MSI a wider color gamut and higher contrast ratio. Generally, I think the LG model is worth a 10 to 15% premium. It depends on the region as to which one of these is the best purchase. In the US right now, the MSI model is a little expensive and has risen in price recently, while the M27QX is on sale and the LG model is at a reasonable position. In Australia, the G274QPX makes the most sense, while in Europe these models can be a bit harder to find, but generally the LG is in a reasonable spot. If money is no object and you want the absolute best of the best 1440p gaming monitor, right now this continues to be the Asus ROG Swift OLED PG27 AQDP. A 27-inch 480Hz W OLED, this beast does it all, whether you're after the best single-player HDR experience or the fastest motion and lowest input lag for multiplayer gaming. In many areas that I assess for, the PG27 AQDP comes out on top, for the hefty price of $1,000 US or around 1,100 euros. So it's certainly a more costly choice relative to other 1440p OLEDs, and there's been no real price movement over the last 6 months. The main reason you'd buy the PG27 AQDP is for a zero-hassle, ultimate clarity multiplayer experience. There is no faster, clearer monitor than 480Hz OLED outside of fiddly backlight strobed LCDs, and this Asus model offers this clarity with full adaptive sync and HDR compatibility at 1440p. In addition to being an excellent product for competitive gamers, the PG27 AQDP is a highly flexible monitor, producing top-tier results across all types of games. If you do a mixture of multiplayer and single-player gaming, this OLED is perfect due to its decent 1440p resolution, stunning HDR performance including per pixel control, and outstanding contrast ratio. It's even one of the brightest OLEDs I've tested in HDR scenes, slightly outperforming other models and not having any of the panel dimming concerns of QD-OLED. The updated subpixel structure relative to first-gen W OLEDs also provides superior text rendering, something you don't get on the 240Hz models, and ASUS's anti-flicker feature seems to work reasonably well. With that said, the PG27 AQDP does use a matte screen coating, which isn't a favourite among OLED buyers, though the fact that this is one of the main weaknesses suggests that pretty much everything else is a strength. While I do believe this is the best 1440p gaming monitor right now, there are some obvious reasons you wouldn't buy it. Single-player gamers are just not going to be running games in excess of 240 FPS outside of a few rare instances, in which case it's just not worth paying a premium to access the 480Hz refresh rate. 240Hz W OLEDs and 360Hz QD OLEDs, or even 240Hz QD OLEDs, are going to offer very similar motion performance and HDR image quality at price points at least $200, probably even $400 cheaper. The value right now is very much in favour of the lower refresh rate models, but if you must have the best, the PG27 AQDP is it. The other reason it might be worth holding off is that 500Hz 1440p QD OLED monitors are coming shortly. We're expecting those to be available in the next couple of months. This will add some much needed competition to the highest refresh rate segment, hopefully lowering prices. QD OLED will also offer something a bit different in its performance characteristics, though I still believe the PG27 AQDP will be hard to beat as it performs very well. In any case, it may pay to wait a couple of months to see how the highest end market shakes out. And that does it for today's monitor recommendation video. Lots and lots of options to choose from, covering most of the 1440p categories I hope you are considering at the moment. If you do want to learn more about the monitors we've talked about today, we do have dedicated reviews for most of them that will go into the specifics around performance and features, which are well worth watching, and most of those are right here on the channel. Throughout the next few weeks, we'll be updating all of our recommendation guides, so if you're after something from a different category, stay tuned because we'll cover it shortly. And as always, links to buy all the monitors we've been talking about in this video are in the description below. You can also use these links to check prices if you're watching this video well after its release. So anyway, thanks for watching this video, this monitor recommendation video. If you do want to support our channel, Monitors Unboxed, and all the reviews, all the testing that goes into this, because there is a lot of work that goes into a recommendation guide like this. We test tons of monitors, heaps of monitors every single year. So yeah, if you want to support that testing, then please consider becoming a Patreon member. Links to that is in the description below. Not only will you be supporting the channel, you'll also gain some pretty cool benefits like a Discord chat. So if you're still a little on the fence about a monitor to buy, head into the Discord chat because there are plenty of people giving advice in there. I'm in there chatting with you guys as well at times. We've also got our calibrated settings and ICC profiles for the monitors we test, BTS content, plenty of other good stuff. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.